The excavation of the tomb was such a long and difficult process, not only because of the quantity of the finds, but also their variety. 26th of November was the day when the real work started. The importance doesn't only lie in the discovery itself, but also the record.
The Griffith Institute preserves thousands of documents from Howard Carter's excavation in the tomb of Tutankhamun. Everything from Carter's personal notes and diaries to the meticulous sketches, measurements, and descriptions of each and every object. Bequeathed after Carter's death, this archive represents the most complete scientific notes from any Egyptological project. Looking to the future, the team at the Griffith Institute are currently working to digitise the entire archive in a modern, accessible format. Unfortunately, cuts to public and academic funding threaten the Griffith Institute's work. It becomes harder to preserve this archaeological treasure trove. Although based at Oxford University, the Griffith Institute largely relies on outside funding to support their projects. In 2026, they need your help to continue this digitisation work and build a record of the Tutankhamun excavation that can last for generations. I realise times are tough, but this kind of work is important for the future. If you're able to support the Griffith Institute, please follow the links in the episode description and consider making a donation.
They first started excavation in several sites, but we know they always had their eye on the Valley of the Kings. And then in summer 1922, Lord Carnarvon was willing to give up when Carter convinced him to have one final season. That was in an area that had been more or less completely unexplored by archaeologists until this point, and it had been avoided because it was very close to the entrance of the tomb of Ramses VI, which was a massive tourist magnet. So, of course, archaeologists wanted to stay away from this. And then only 3 days later, the success story began. And we can read what Howard Carter wrote into his diary on the evening of the 4th of November, where we can see first steps of tomb found. And if you have a look, you can see he scribbled this all over the page. And in literally thousands of pages and notes we have in Howard Carter's handwriting. This is unique. He always stays aligned with his tiny, neat little handwriting. But this time, all over the page. And I think this is as close as maybe an Englishman at this time was able to show some emotions of excitement. And here we can read, when Lord Carnarvon asked me, "Can you see anything?" I replied to him, "Yes, it is wonderful." Photography was one of the most urgent needs. Carter and Carnarvon were very good photographers themselves, but they knew they are simply not good enough. And quite conveniently, in the first days after the discovery, Carter had received a congratulatory telegram from the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York, offering any help that he might need. And so Harry Burton joined the team, who was the photographer of the Egyptians mission of the Metropolitan Museum, had more than 10 years of experience working in Egypt, was one of the best archaeological photographers. And in the 10-year process, he produced more than 3,000 images, some of them really under difficult conditions, creating some of what have been described as most compelling archaeological pictures ever created. The excavation also heavily depended on the Egyptian members of the team, whose experience of working in the Valley of the Kings was really indispensable, although their contribution is very often overlooked and also barely recorded. The excavation of the tomb was such a long and difficult process, not only because of the quantity of the finds, but also their variety. And in the very first days of the excavation, the team had to develop a very meticulous workflow that is represented in the archival records. At the end of every season, the objects were wrapped up and then packed into wooden crates that were transported the 5 miles from the desert to the River Nile, where they were put on a barge and then sailed up the 650 kilometers up north to Cairo, where they were put on immediate display in the Egyptian Museum on Tahrir Square. It is clear why the process took so long, but also the importance of it. The importance doesn't only lie in the discovery itself, but also the records that were produced during this process. They are really a first-hand account that helps us to relive the excavation on an almost day-by-day basis. So what you look at here are some drawings again made by Carter in the group on the seal impressions, where Breasted took the notes, did the typology, But again, Carter provides these astonishing drawings of the seal impressions. Probably what most people are familiar with are, of course, the photographs that were produced during the excavation. And in the archive, we have about 1,200 large-size glass plate negatives made by Harry Burton and about 1,500 smaller-size glass and film plate negatives, together with really thousands of original and later prints. And I think looking at the images, it's quite clear what Harry Burton produced was not only of archaeological value, it's also really visually stunning. And the majority of the images are what I would describe as standard archaeological records, an object record. But there are also some images that Burton very carefully staged and arranged, and very often showing the Egyptian and the English members of the team, like this amazing photograph that we have here, where Carter and other team members are lifting the roof of the shrine. And what I find quite fascinating is that it gives you an immediate sense of the scale. So you can see how small the space was in which they were working. So together, these documents really represent an interconnected record of the whole excavation project process. Since the early 60s, the Griffith Institute started publishing the records in the traditional academic way of books, the Tutankhamun Tomb series. However, by the early 90s, it had become clear, Jaromir Malik, who was then the keeper of the archive, realized that at this speed and in this format, it would take us about 200 years to publish all the records that were produced during the excavation process. So the decision was made to use the internet. And over the next 15 years, the first digital platform was developed called Tutankhamun, Anatomy of an Excavation. And that was really a groundbreaking project at the time. And it really transformed the access that researchers from all over the world had to this material. However, we all know technology moves very fast. And that project, the original database, had its limitations. For instance, there were only black and white images, and only the object cards and the images were connected. You couldn't search in that database. So over the past at least 10 years, we knew that we need a more modern, a more interconnected and searchable database that really connects every image with every node and really reflects the complexities, the interconnectedness of the archive as we understand it today. So many years of planning and fundraising followed. And last year, we received a research grant by the John Fell Fund and kicked off our new project, Tutankhamun, the Tutankhamun Spatial Archive. We started the process in May when we employed a research assistant, Lara Bamfield. Then from June on, the database was built, and over the summer, the team and our many, many volunteers without whom we would not be able to do this work started to create thousands of metadata, upload images and transcriptions. And we finally launched the Tutankhamun Spatial Archive on the 11th of November 2025 to coincide with the centenary of the unwrapping of Tutankhamun's mummified body in 1925. So what you will find in the beta phase of our website so far in the database are all records connected to this event, the unwrapping of the king's mummified body, so including the mask, but also the 100+ objects discovered inside the linen bandages. As you can imagine, this is all a very expensive process. I said we are very lucky to have a lot of volunteers helping us, but beyond that, we always need money for digitizing, but also continuing looking after the records or updating IT. So every help really is welcome. And on our new website, you will see a dedicated area, Support Us, that shows you the many different ways in which you can support the Tutankhamun Spatial Archive.